So since we finished the previous conversation, lecture 24, with the discussion of, glucagon and insulin, it's time to talk about metabolism. So the term metabolism, all chemical reactions in the body. All reactions are divided into catabolic, which is degradation. Catabolic reactions release energy, and the term for such reactions is exergonic. Anabolic or synthetic reactions usually require energy and therefore endergonic. So in a nutshell, this illustration on the right here shows you exergonic reactions, which are mostly catabolic, release energy that fuels endergonic reactions that are anabolic, and the intermediate is ATP. So the whole idea here is that you have a bunch of nutrients, such as carbohydrates, which are central, fats, and proteins, which through the series of catabolic reactions contribute to the synthesis of ATP through three main steps: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation as a part of an electron transport chain. So the result of this is the generation of a bunch of ATP. So we're going to focus, when I say we're going to focus on metabolism, we're not going to talk about biochemistry of this. I presume you talked about it before. Instead, we're going to focus on the processing of nutrients. So, first of all, ATP, which is an energy currency of the cell, cannot be stored. It's a short term. The good thing about how to think about ATP, think about ATP as money. Money like cash, okay? Let's say we are in 1970s, okay? It's cash. So this cash, you use it all the time. You don't really store it. You're not loading boxes with cash, in the house. I mean, unless you are selling heroin, then you certainly do that. So, when blood glucose increases, when glucose is supplied all the time, it means that ATP levels, I misspoke, ATP levels go up. ATP levels that go up, you have a lot of money, you want to save them, so that increased level of ATP stimulates glycogenesis, which, results in a bunch of glycogen, So, a lot of ATP leads to glycogenesis. Now, if you don't have a lot of ATP, usually it's because you don't have a lot of glucose, So reduced levels of glucose stimulate the opposite process, glycogenolysis, which breaks down glycogen to release glucose. So, when you get money, you can do two things with them. You can spend them, you can save them. So saving, as we mentioned, is glycogenesis. Spending is glycolysis. Now, when you need money, you can either, get into your savings account, break down your glycogen, or find some moonlighting job and get more money, gluconeogenesis. Or you can just start printing your own money, right? Does that make sense? But your glucose regulation doesn't end here, because you have another important source of energy, which is lipids. So lipids are very energy dense. And at first, they are broken into glycerol and fatty acids. So glycerol is converted into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which is the intermediate of glycolysis, which inevitably ends up being a pyruvic acid, which is then decarboxylated to become a holy grail of human metabolism, acetyl-CoA. Fatty acids usually have a lot of carbons, so they have to be chopped up in the process called beta oxidation. This beta oxidation that happens in mitochondria and involves a lot of steps, which you can see on the right and explore them on your own. We're not going to, the point is that at the end of the day, you end up with acetyl-CoA as well. And then acetyl-CoA can enter the Krebs cycle, get oxidized, and the hydrogens and electrons will participate in oxidative phosphorylation, generate a bunch of ATP, blah, 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 all that stuff. But the lipid metabolism doesn't end there. We're going to try to link, hear me out. This is going to be something that is of a sort of a practical interest, I believe, for you. We're going to try to link the breakdown of glucose and the breakdown of fats. So, what I'm going to focus on, hear me out, I'm going to focus on first the situation when you have a lot of food. So you consume a lot of food which is rich in carbohydrates. It means that your glucose levels go up, insulin, commands it to get in the cells, and in the cells, glucose undergoes glycolysis. The product of glycolysis, pyruvic acid, is oxidized to acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA enters Krebs cycle, right? And you generate a bunch of ATP. Okay, makes sense, right? All good? Now, we mentioned ATP is money. And you can't, you're not storing money in the box. You put it in your savings account. So ATP stimulates glycogenesis. But let's say you have a weird bank that limits how much you can put in the savings account. Okay? So glycogen storage is limited. Let's say you ran out of glycogen storage, but glucose keeps on coming. So you have more and more dough, So how do you store it? Start making fat. In the process of lipogenesis, you use glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate to generate glycerol, and you use acetyl-CoA to generate fatty acids. Fatty acids then react with glycerol, and that combination is triglycerides, which are fats. So far, does that make sense? Now, this is what happens. This is how people become overweight and obese. Okay? The imbalance between the consumption and expenditure. But what if you decide to simply skip carbohydrates and rely on the diet rich in fat and protein alone? Let's see what happens. So if you consume what, keto or, Atkins diet, you rely on a very small amount of glucose, which in our approximation, we can say that glycolysis is shut down. So lack of pyruvic acid forces your metabolism to start relying on the fats. So in this case, triglycerides undergo the process of lipolysis, which in turn breaks them into glycerol and fatty acids. As we mentioned before, glycerol is converted to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, right? So you kind of reopen glycolysis again. Making sense? Fatty acids, in the process of beta oxidation, form acetyl-CoA. So you basically bypass glycolysis entirely and supply this acetyl-CoA to Krebs cycle. Right? So it all sounds great. Because if you eat fat, I don't mean lard, I mean like butter and oils and avocados and stuff that is very rich in fat and very poor in carbs, right? You not only burning your, first of all, fat makes you feel full much quicker. If you ever ate avocado, you know what I'm talking about. Okay? So, but it doesn't, that dietary fat doesn't supply you with enough calories. So your body, where does it take calories from? Your own fat. So in addition to dietary fats, you start breaking down your adipose tissue, which is great. There is one conundrum here. There's an organ in your body which doesn't do well without glucose. No. Pretty much every cell can get away without glucose. Can do this lipolysis thing, except for one very special organ. Do you have munchies when you study? Yeah? No? Good for you. Huh? Say again? Okay, that's good. But your brain relies on glucose. So, somehow, let's say you completely excluded all carbohydrates from your diet, but your brain needs glucose, right? So where do you get it from? You get it I'm trying to see what okay. So oxaloacetic acid is used for gluconeogenesis, the process of making glucose from scratch for your brain. But oxaloacetic acid is one of the components, one of the intermediates of the Krebs cycle. So if you use one of the components of the cycle, what happens to the cycle? It's not a cycle anymore, it stops, right? You use one intermediate, that's it. So you effectively shut down Krebs. But acetyl-CoA keeps coming. It has nowhere to go though. So So your liver starts converting acetyl-CoA in ketones in the process known as ketogenesis. These ketone bodies, acetoacetic acid, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetone, can be used as energy sources in your cells, except for the brain. Brain doesn't do well on ketosis. Okay? So what I described right now is the transition from the regular diet into ketogenic diet, and when you go into dietary ketosis. Anyone ever tried? It sucks. Okay? You feel tired all the time. What's interesting in ketosis, neither your endurance nor your strength are altered. You just feel tired all the time. You lose weight, and specifically fat, incredibly fast. You become very lean. The long-term effects of keto diet on like cardiovascular system are not really known. And by not known, I mean nobody really studied, but circumstantial evidence suggests it's not really that bad. And what's interesting, if you ever ran a really, really long distance, you may be familiar with the condition or situation known as hitting the wall. Yeah, when you run, and then suddenly you cannot move your legs. This is the moment when your last crumbs of glycogen are used up, and muscle cells have to switch to the ketone metabolism. It takes a couple of miles. And then you're good. This is why the way to avoid it is to supply yourself with glucose from the very beginning of the race. Or you can preventatively go into ketosis. And if you are in ketosis, you don't need glucose. You just burn your fat. Okay? There are people who run ultramarathons that live in ketosis. They are on the keto diet all the time. Okay, makes sense? It's not a sort of a universal response, so to say, because if you stop doing that, you can gain weight back. Okay? Does that make sense? It works. It does. Now, if you don't have fats or glucose to use, then your organism is going to break down proteins into amino acids. And hear me out. This is all I want you to know. These amino acids can be broken down or are broken down in the processes of transamination and deamination. Okay? The products of these processes can end up in the Krebs cycle, or they can become pyruvate. Let me see if I can, here. Alanine is converted to pyruvate. Pyruvate is the terminal metabolite of the glycolysis. So you effectively have two options here. Either get the products into the Krebs cycle or get them into glycolysis. Side products of oxidative deamination are ammonia, is ammonia, which effectively forms urea, and urea is excreted through kidneys. Why this is important? The gym rats, especially younger gym rats, consume absurd amounts of protein. And that protein inevitably is broken down and oxidized. Your body does not rely on a single source of energy, usually because it's always a mix. At least, if you're not going crazy on the diet. So people who consume large amounts of protein and small amounts of carbs and fat, they use protein as the energy source, which means they produce a lot of urea. Urea has to be eliminated through kidneys, and the only way to eliminate urea is to flush it out. So the regulation of excretion, urea excretion, is mediated by thirst. You have a lot of urea in the blood, that makes you thirsty, you drink a lot of water. This is why those gym rats often walk around with huge jugs of water. It's not a pose. They are really, really thirsty. Okay? I don't know what to respond to your question if it damages the kidneys or not. It shouldn't. I mean, if you eat 5 ribeyes a day and cover it with 2 sticks of butter, it's not the kidneys I would be concerned about. What can happen, one of the side products that can form when people consume high protein diet is uric acid. Uric acid may not be fully eliminated by kidneys, may accumulate in the joints and result in gout. So this is the summary. I'm not going to go over the entire summary. I'm going to highlight that the products of amino acid breakdown can either enter the glycolysis step or Krebs cycle. And I'm going to highlight that if you want to build muscle, you actually have to very carefully select the balance between the protein and the energy sources. Now, before we move on to absorptive state, something very interesting, in my opinion, about the whole diet thing. So people count calories to lose weight, right? There was a study with a fair amount of participants, human study, where participants were divided into 2 groups. One group ate regular diet. I mean, not McDonald's, just normal diet. Counting calories. Another group ate high-fat, high-protein, low-carb diet. Not counting calories. Eat ad libitum, as much as you want. Well, first of all, proteins and lipids give you satiety much quicker. In a nutshell, the rate of the weight loss in both groups was the same. So what I'm getting at, if you design your diet in a way that it is mostly fats and proteins with very little carbs, you don't really need to count calories. You just won't be able to eat all of them. Does that make sense? It's just going to be full, Think about how many cookies you can eat, how many eggs and bacon you can eat. You can eat way more cookies. Huh? Yes, what I'm saying is to get to the stage of satiety, you eat, seriously, 3 eggs, 3 slices of bacon, you're probably good for the entire day. It's heavy. Cookies-wise, you just started, Absorptive state. Now, I'm going to be kind of punctate, and I will explain what I can ask you about. Absorptive state. during and after meal. Okay? So what you're going to get? What processes are going to be upregulated? Protein synthesis, lipogenesis, glycogenesis, glycolysis. Does that make sense? All these processes are going to be upregulated. They're going to be increased. Am I making sense? And the hormone that regulates it is, not surprisingly, insulin. Because insulin increases the amino acid uptake and stimulates protein synthesis. And it increases the glucose uptake and stimulates glycogen synthesis, eventually lipogenesis and glycolysis. Post-absorptive state, between the meals. For your brain to function properly, blood glucose should remain steady. Okay, you with me? So, what's going to happen? Glycogen is going to be broken down to glucose in the process of glycogenolysis, lipolysis, results in the production of glycerol and fatty acids. Remember, glycerol can become glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and fatty acids will be oxidized to acetyl-CoA in beta oxidation. Glucose will be synthesized by gluconeogenesis. Okay? Mostly in kidneys. Okay, and you're going to be in ketotic state. And of course, your proteins are going to be broken down to amino acids. So amino acids can be used as the energy source. Okay? And what regulates your post-absorptive state? It's glucagon. Glucagon will initiate glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, lipolysis in the fat tissue, okay, and eventually protein breakdown. Does that make sense to you? Now, regarding the hormones, I want you to understand, basically know which hormones are anabolic, hormones that stimulate synthesis, growth, and which hormones are catabolic. Anabolic, insulin, growth hormone, thyroxine, testosterone. Catabolic, glucagon, obviously, breaks down a lot of, stimulates the breakdown of a lot of stuff. Cortisol. Okay? Does that make sense? So cortisol. Am I clear? So one of the reasons why, well, yeah, kind of reasons, why high intensity short-term training is better for the weight loss and weight management compared to low intensity endurance exercise. Think about this. If you go and you exercise really hard for like 20-30 minutes, you stimulate, you have minimal stimulation of glucagon and cortisol. The long-term low-intensity exercise is perceived by your body as a stress. So it releases cortisol, which not only increases your blood glucose, but also breaks down your muscle tissue. And what's important? Long-term, low-intensity exercise activity dramatically increases your sense of hunger. You're feeling hungry much more compared to the high-intensity short-term exercise. So you tend to consume more food. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, there is a lot here about the regulation of food intake. What I want you to understand is this. The regulation of food intake occurs in the brainstem and in the hypothalamus. Okay? And the key hormones that regulate it are insulin. Insulin reduces your hunger and increases your sensation of satiety. And leptin, okay, which has the same function. Okay, are we good so far? Now what about gut hormones? We're going to talk about those gut hormones very briefly, but yes, think about the whole regulation pathway. You eat food. This food eventually ends up in your gut. In response to that food, your gut produces hormones which regulate the digestive processes. But on top of that, this gut hormone signal to our hypothalamus, put down the fork. Like, we have food, we need to deal with that food. We're going to talk about whether we respond to those signals, but that's a separate story. Okay? So we're going to do a sort of a complete turn. Talk about gonadal hormones. Now, the good news, I want to highlight the general idea how gonadal hormones work. We're not going to cover female regulation because it's so elegant but so complicated. It just doesn't belong here. So we're going to describe the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis using male reproductive hormones. It all starts in hypothalamus. It produces the hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the anterior pituitary gland, which then releases follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormones, or gonadotropins. Which means these will act on gonads. And male gonads are testes. So in response to gonadotropins, testes produce testosterone. That's the responsibility of interstitial or Leydig cells. And inhibin, which we'll go back to, by seminiferous tubules. Okay? Now, the thing is, testosterone is critical for maturation of sperm cells inside the seminiferous tubules. Okay, make sense? So, without testosterone is essential for producing more and more sperm cells. The sperm cells accumulate in the testes, blah, blah, blah. And turns out, as more sperm cells are accumulated, inhibin will exert negative feedback inhibiting anterior pituitary, inhibiting the release of gonadotropins. So will testosterone. The only difference is that testosterone here will act not only on the anterior pituitary, but also on the hypothalamus. So it all sounds very exciting, but here's some clinical relevance. First, the use of testosterone as the performance enhancement drug. So imagine that I start shooting testosterone, right? So the levels of testosterone go up, which means my anterior pituitary and hypothalamus are getting shut down, so levels of gonadotropin releasing hormone and gonadotropins, both go down, yes. And gonadotropins, what do they stimulate? They stimulate testes, right? And without stimulation, what happens to my testes? They shrink. And eventually, I become infertile. This was one of the main side effects when early bodybuilders were using testosterone. Okay? What about inhibin then? Think about this. The more sperm cells a male carries inside the testes, the more inhibin is produced. Which makes perfect sense, because it slows down hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis, and it means that the production of sperm cells slows down, because you already have enough. How do you reduce the levels of inhibin? Ejaculation. When a male gets rid of some of the sperm cells, inhibin levels go down. Okay, inhibition goes down, and the axis is stimulated once again. So it's a very elegant negative feedback loop, which is nothing compared to the regulation of ovarian cycle in females. That's a completely different story. You will talk about it in reproductive system. It's like we don't have time for this. What are the effects of both, and I highlight both, estrogen, which is female. So in females, basically, instead of testosterone, you produce estrogen. But again, the loop is complicated. So what are the effects? Both are anabolic. Testosterone to a greater extent than estrogen. Secondary sex characteristics and the development of external genitalia. In testosterone specifically is responsible for sex drive, for libido. Okay? In males, now we're talking about males. Secondary sex characteristics, voice deepening, increase in mass and size, bone growth, basically think about your puberty or puberty of a boy that you know. In female hormones, again, you see the flow chart on the right? We're not even touching that. I promise there will be no, the only thing you need to know about the female hormones, hear me out. So, ovaries produce estrogen or estradiol. That's it. Okay? So in females, growth spurt, secondary sex characteristics, which includes breast development, deposition of fat under the skin. Why in general females have more fat than males? What is the biological role of a female? To get children, right? And a fetus is a parasite biologically. So you have to feed a parasite. That's the only reason, okay? Obviously, the growth of reproductive organs. Women also produce, at some point, progesterone. Progesterone has very narrow range of functions. It is preparation of the uterus for possible implantation of the fertilized egg, and preparation of breast for lactation. Does that make sense? So I don't want to go in all the graphs, but if you look at the levels of hormones, female hormones, during menstrual cycle, the peak of estrogen and progesterone is before the menstruation. During menstruation, they super low. Okay? And all these sensations are like enlarged breasts and stuff. That's because of progesterone and estrogen. Okay? So I can't emphasize enough. Know the chain, like, gonadotropins in females stimulate estrogen and progesterone, and that's it. That's all I care about. Now, we have very few things to talk about because I'm not going to go crazy on the secondary endocrine organs. I'm just going to highlight some hormones. So, sorry, we're still on the primary though. Pineal gland. Part of epithalamus, okay, produces melatonin. Melatonin regulates your sleep cycle. It's not the only regulator though, but it synchronizes your sleep cycle because when it is light, melatonin production is inhibited, so you're not sleepy. When there's dark, melatonin production is increased and, you're sleepy. It is not a sleeping pill. Also, did I already shit on vitamins? Yeah? Yeah. This is one of the very, very few dietary supplements that actually works. It works, it helps you to synchronize your sleep-wake cycles, say after the jet lag or when you pull an all-nighter, something like that. And there was an experiment recently, some dude went into a cave and lived in a cave for 72 days, recording his sleep pattern. It wasn't normal, like 8 hours of sleep, 16. It got weird. It was rhythmical, but it lacked synchronization with the day and night because he basically didn't have a day. It was all night. Okay? Thymus, a weird organ which is very active in kids. Its role is to regulate lymphocyte maturation, T-cell maturation. Very active in kids, practically gone in adults. Okay? Just a trivia piece, Nobel Prize this year was tangentially given for the study of thymus. It was given for the discovery of the mechanism of certain autoimmune disorders. Okay? FOXP3 transcriptional factors and lymphocyte maturation. And one of the guys who got it, 2 men, 1 woman, he discovered the foundational mechanism of autoimmunity by removing thymus from mice. And he's Japanese. In Japan now, if you're an adult and you get a thoracic surgery, your thymus is just removed. We don't need it. Like, not a single person in this room needs thymus. It's dysfunctional. Okay? So it looks like this, and it contains cortex and medulla, like many other what's called parenchymatous organs that are not empty. Okay, secondary endocrine organs. Hear me out. Hormone, stimulus, what it does, obviously opposite to the stimulus, and basically how. So, first, atrial natriuretic peptide. Atrial means atria, so heart. Stimulus, elevated blood pressure. Okay? Response, reduced blood volume and blood pressure. How? In other European languages, sodium is called some kind of a derivative of a word natrium. Natriuretic means let's pee more sodium out. What follows sodium? Say it out loud. Water. We talked about this when we talked about aldosterone. Water follows sodium. When you excrete sodium, you also excrete water, you reduce blood volume, you reduce blood pressure. Okay? Gastrin. The hormone that's produced by your stomach. It broadly increases digestive activities throughout your digestive tract, stomach and intestine, okay? It increases the peristalsis, the movement of food, it increases secretions, and so on and so forth. Are we good? Ghrelin, produced by your stomach when it is empty. You are hungry because of ghrelin, okay? Secretin, cholecystokinin, produced by the gut. All you need to know, they stimulate digestive activities in the gut and associated organs. They stimulate your liver and your pancreas to produce bile and pancreatic juice to break down food. Okay, that's all good. Okay, make sense? Gastric inhibitory polypeptide, GIP, kind of insulin-like, so it, stimulates insulin, reduces gastric motility. And finally, GLP-1. That's your Ozempic, folks. Full disclosure, it's not Ozempic. GLP-1 is a peptide. Ozempic is a drug that stimulates GLP-1 receptor. So it mimics GLP-1. And what it does, increased insulin means reduced appetite. Reduced gastric motility and secretion means that the food stays in your tummy longer. That makes sense? Which means you feel full longer. You don't eat that often. Okay? And so basically, the study started long ago, and now it is used to treat type 2 diabetes, indeed. But the side effect? Weight loss. This is why it is so popular now. Kidneys. 2 hormones. And I want you to know. Renin. All you need to know about renin is that it is produced in response to low blood pressure, and it increases blood volume and blood pressure. That's it. Second kidney hormone is erythropoietin. it responds to low red blood cells, which produce hypoxia by increasing production of red blood cells. So hear me out. Anyone ever spend considerable some time in the mountains? I'm talking 10, 11,000 feet elevation, yeah? And I mean, what I'm saying, you aren't leaving there. It's a different story. You come there and then you go back. Like Utah, Colorado, yeah? Rockies, fine. Smokies aren't tall enough. But we're talking Rocky Mountains. So if you try to climb a 14,000, you're going to be short of breath. That's hypoxia. Because of that hypoxia, your bone marrow starts producing a lot of red blood cells. You adjust to it eventually, and then you go on the plains. And suddenly you are the fastest runner in the team. Olympic training center for pretty much all endurance sports, like running, especially mid-distance running, and cycling, are in the Rockies, Colorado, Utah. Okay. Bones, I'm not asking about the bones because nobody knows. Skin, we talked about it. Cholecalciferol or vitamin D. So here's the thing. Listen, a question for you. Hypothetically, you live naked on a tropical island, always sunny except for the night, so you're going to generate a lot of vitamin D. You are. You're going to generate like a lot of vitamin D. Does that mean that you're going to absorb a lot more calcium from the food? The answer is no. Because you need to activate vitamin D in order for it to stimulate the uptake of calcium from the food. And for this, you need parathyroid hormone, which is produced only when you're calcium deficient. So if you're not calcium deficient, you can produce vitamin D all you want. It's going to do nothing. Okay, unless it's activated. Liver produces a bunch of hormones. So we already learned about insulin-like growth factors that are part of the growth hormone regulation. Angiotensinogen, which is converted into angiotensin. It's a liver hormone that regulates your blood pressure. And thrombopoietin. Thrombopoietin is the hormone produced in response to low blood platelet counts. So when you shorten platelets, your liver will produce this hormone, will stimulate platelet production. Okay? These are honestly two of my favorite hormones. I studied obesity for 5 years. I personally think that all obesity research, like especially, how can we treat obesity? Just put down the fork. That's all. That's all treatment. Like we studied, it was interesting, it was cardiovascular effects of certain type of obesity. We call it benign obesity or mild obesity on mice. But overall, we know it's bad. Let's switch to something that we don't know yet. Okay? It's a joking thing. Don't get me wrong. We still should study. So these are two hormones that regulate energy balance. One of them, and you may never heard of it, is adiponectin. Adiponectin is a very weird hormone. It's produced by your fat cells. Okay? And it has, so it's weird in many ways from hormone standpoint, but it is a hormone. And its effects, it's low in, adiponectin is low in people with metabolic disorders, type 2 diabetes or obesity. And it's been shown that adiponectin is cardioprotective, okay, that it reduces activation of macrophages, which means it reduces inflammation, okay, it reduces the division of smooth muscle cells in the blood vessels, resulting in less stenosis, okay, so it's anti-inflammatory, cardioprotective, and it also increases insulin sensitivity, so it is anti-diabetic. Do follow. So, what's interesting though, is that if you look at patients who have chronic inflammatory disorder, let's say rheumatoid arthritis, that's inflammation. In those patients, adiponectin is super high. We don't know why. Like, if a person has type 2 diabetes, it's low. Okay? If person is obese, it's low. If person has chronic inflammatory condition that they grew up with, it suddenly becomes high. The idea is inflammation triggers adiponectin production. But adiponectin cannot do anything about it because it's autoimmune condition. It lies in a completely different, plane. So it stays up for some reason because of that constant inflammatory stimulation. But to be honest, my favorite hormone is this. It's leptin. Leptin is produced by adipose tissue after you eat something. Okay? And it controls satiety. It tells your brain, literally, like it tells hypothalamus to stop eating. And I always say that this is the only hormone which effect can be consciously and voluntarily disregarded. You can't do anything about insulin, taking glucose out of your blood. You can't do anything about thyroid hormone increasing your basal metabolic rate. But when you finish your second slice of pizza and leptin quite literally screams at you to stop doing that, you just grab another slice because you want it. That make sense? Now, this is the illustration of leptin deficiency in mice and in humans. So on the right, you can see a kid. I believe it's age 3. I mean, it's not up to scale, but obviously the kid in the left image is grossly overweight. Okay? Probably morbidly obese at this point. Because this kid does not produce leptin, and there's no regulation of food intake. He doesn't get full. Okay? On the right, the same kid after receiving leptin therapy. Okay, but this is probably the most dramatic. So the images here, you can disregard the names. Basically, on the left, it's the mouse that is deficient in the gene responsible for leptin production, so-called OB, they called OB mice. So, are you familiar with alleles? We have 2 copies of the gene, every gene, at least 2 copies. And OB mouse, like this one, lacks both copies. It doesn't produce leptin at all. This is a mouse that does. How Anyone wants to venture a guess? What is the mass of an average lab mouse? You can use grams, you can use ounces. Come on. Huh? How many? 5 ounces. That's pushing the rat. They're really small. Now, 1 ounce is a pretty big mouse. Yeah. A regular adult lab mouse is about an ounce. 28 grams, 25, 28. I fed my mice high-fat, low-carb, low-cholesterol diet. No, not so low, not low-carb, no. High-fat, high-carb, low-cholesterol diet. Okay? I tried this diet. It was basically the cookie dough, taste-wise. It was really good. The largest mouse in my experiments was slightly over 2 ounces. Okay? Obi mice, these guys, they go about 3 ounces and more. I felt sorry for mine because it was kind of hard for them to move around. Obi mice basically crawl because they so big, they round. They have hard time moving. Okay? This is the effect of leptin on the control of food intake. Okay?